my name is Alejandro. I am the comedy curator for the Borscht Belt Festival. And this headliner bringing up to the stage somebody that has been wonderful to work with, very funny person, and I'm really excited to bring up. Before I do that, I have some little announcements here. All right, so please turn off all cell phones. If you must text, kindly do so outside of the room. Okay. Back in 1986, Philadelphia's Jewish newspaper held the Jewish Comic of the Year contest. The winner was a chiropractor. A lawyer came in second. So please give a warm welcome to the third place winner, Rabbi Bob Alper.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Keep it going for Coach Dills. He's still over there. Wow. Yeah. And Alejandro will introduce me. He's my colleague. We've been corresponding. He set this whole thing up. One of the most delightful people I've ever had to work with. He's a real mensch, and I appreciate him. So this whole thing of being a rabbi and a stand-up comic came together in one moment. I was changing planes in Philadelphia on our way to a show in LA, and a woman walked over to me, did a double take. She said, "You're Rabbi Alper, aren't you?" I said, "Yes." She said, "You probably don't remember me," and I didn't. She said, "But I was a kid in your congregation here in Philadelphia during the 80s. And I used to watch the way you would teach and lead services and counsel and preach. And so I decided to become a rabbi anyway." I think the most exciting show I ever did was back in 1992. I was in Manchester, New Hampshire, just before the presidential primaries, performing at Temple Adat Yeshurun's 6th annual Deli and Comedy Night. And George and Barbara Bush came by for a campaign appearance. Very exciting. Secret Service agents all over the place. And I was speaking with them. When Barbara walked over, she said, "George, do you want pastrami or corned beef?" He said, "Gee, I don't know." And it was at that moment that I became a presidential advisor. I said, "Sir, the pastrami is very tasty. You might want to try it on rye bread, hold the mayo." Another show that I remember very well, I was in Sacramento, and the organization that brought me in had rented the gymnasium of the Jewish day school. They set it up to look like a comedy club, cute little tables, candles. And as they introduced me, they said, "This is very exciting. This is the first time in Sacramento history that 8 rabbis are attending one event." And I started thinking, let's see, 8 rabbis plus myself made 9. If we had one more rabbi, just one more rabbi, we could have had a full court basketball game. So I was born and raised in Providence, Rhode Island. I never went to the Catskills. I mean, when I was a kid, we went to the hydrant. That was about it. Born in Providence, and I was part of a large dysfunctional extended family, not a close-knit group. I was back in Providence. I left after high school and didn't live there, but I came back for my high school reunion, and I was walking around the kitchen of our old synagogue, and a young woman was sitting there cutting cake. She looked up, she said, "Bobby?" And I realized it was my first cousin whom I hadn't seen in 24 years. And in the course of the conversation, she said, "You know, I was in Barnes & Noble where I saw your book, and I almost bought it." And it wasn't the easiest thing being a little Jewish kid in Providence then, back in the 50s. I mean, Israel was not secure. The Holocaust was a fresh wound. My parents couldn't buy houses in certain neighborhoods or join organizations in certain places. So you can imagine what a thrill it was when something happened one Saturday morning. I was about 8 years old when Brown University had its home football games. The parade from the campus down to the stadium right near my house. I came running home. "Mom, Dad, you won't believe it. Brown's playing a Jewish college." They said, "What do you mean a Jewish college?" I said, "It's a Jewish college. They got Jewish coaches, they got Jewish cheerleaders, they got a whole bunch of Jewish football players." They said, "What's the name of this Jewish college?" I said, "Temple University." And I was always pretty funny. As a kid, the word we used for our rear end was not fanny or tuchus. We called it a tutu, which might have been just our family word. I don't know. But I can recall when I was very small, a babysitter came. She said, "Does anyone want to go to the park?" One kid said, "I want to go." My sister said, "I want to go too." And I can remember saying, "I want to go too." Now, you may not think that's so hysterical, but I remember thinking at that very moment, I am one funny toddler. And I know you've been watching me for a while. You're absolutely right. People tell me this all the time. It's hypothetical. It could never really happen. It's not a possibility. But they say, given the way I look and the way I sound, if ever Steve Martin and Alan Alda were to have a child. I was performing in London, and a fellow came up and said, you know, you look so much like our former Prime Minister, John Major. I said, yes, and when I wear a dress, I look like Margaret Thatcher. And it reminds me of the fact there was another rabbi comedian, Jackie Mason. A couple differences, though, between Jackie Mason and me. First of all, I'm still a practicing rabbi, always will be. He stopped right early in his career. Secondly, the accent. You know, Jackie Mason, blah, 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 I can't imitate it. But to me, he did not have a Jewish accent, a real Jewish accent. To me, an authentic Jewish accent was one like my grandfather had, something he derived from that faraway land of his birth, Bangor, Maine. I can hear him now saying, well, Bobby, got to get you down to the synagogue. Yes, start you studying for your bar mitzvah. I mean, to me, that's a Jewish accent. Grandpa loved telling stories. He told me he was up on the bridge of the Bar Harbor Ferry one time, talking with the captain, when a very proper Boston society matron joined the conversation. Suddenly, a seagull flew over and made a dropping splat on the captain's lapel. Oh my goodness, said the matron, I'll run and get some toilet paper. And the captain replied, oh, don't you bother. By the time you get back, that bird will be half a mile from here. I think I've always been an unusual rabbi. You know, for example, one of the things I love to do just before Yom Kippur, our Day of Atonement, is to go around to family and friends and tell them, if there's anything during the past year I have said or done that has hurt you or offended you, I want you to know you're too sensitive. I am 80 years old. I'm 80 years old. It's not that bad. I mean, my hero is Harrison Ford, who just turned 83. He's making another movie. It's going to be called Indiana Jones and the Enlarged Prostate. Well, they're going to test market that. If that title doesn't resonate with the audience, the backup title is Indiana Jones and the Reverse Mortgage. And he's got another project. Remember The Fugitive? The movie The Fugitive, not the TV, The Fugitive. And they're going to do another episode. In this one, Dr. Richard Kimball flees assisted living. I was on the phone applying for a credit card. The guy says, marital status. I said, happy. He said, so you're single? I'm not. I've been married for 56 years. Thank you. We met in 1964. I was home from college at the end of my sophomore year, hanging out with a friend whose younger sister was hosting a slumber party. We crashed the party, and the girls were all sitting on the floor of the kitchen. I looked down, I saw one really cute girl wearing pink baby doll pajamas. And I thought, wow, I bet she would look hot in clothes. We were married in 1969. Back then, women didn't have the choices they have today. Today, women can take their husband's names, they can keep their maiden names, they can hyphenate. Back then, my wife did the traditional thing. She took my name. Her name used to be Sherry Zink, and now it's Bob Zink. And our lives are totally in sync. For example, at the same time I got hearing aids, she stopped mumbling. Let me tell you about that joke. In 2015, when Pope Francis came to America, Jimmy Fallon decided to host a joke with the Pope contest. He told a joke he thought the Pope would like. He then asked people to send in their joke by video to a website. And they got entries from Cardinal Dolan, Brooke Shields, Bill Murray, Al Roker. They had 4,000 entries from 47 countries for that contest. And that joke about the hearing aids, it won. I am the honorary comedic advisor to the Pope. But I thought, if I ever met the Pope, I didn't meet him, if I ever met him, I wouldn't tell him that joke. Because, look, English was his fourth language. I would tell him a joke that had simple words that repeated themselves. Here's the joke I'd tell the Pope. Hello? Hello, sweetheart, is your mommy home? Mommy's busy. Well, is Daddy there? Daddy's busy. Well, is anyone else? The firemen. All right, let me talk to one of them. They're busy. Well, is anyone else? The policeman. All right, sweetie, put one of the police. They're busy. Well, what are they all doing? They're looking for me. So Sherry is a retired psychotherapist. She used to tell me things that her colleagues shared with her. For example, one woman was dealing with a couple around the issue of communication in their marriage. And at a certain point, she said to the wife, let me ask you, how do you express when you want to make love? The one said, well, I say, sweetheart, I'm going upstairs now, going to take a long, hot shower. Her husband said, that's what you've been telling me? All these years, I thought you meant I shouldn't run the dishwasher. Sherry had a colonoscopy, her last one. You get a certain age, that's it. But I was in the hospital waiting room late afternoon. There was one other man who was watching television, was kind of blaring. I was trying to read. A nurse walked in. She said, Mr. Albert? I said, well, it's Alper. She said, well, your wife is all set. Let me take you to her room. When we got there, she said, would you like me to see if she's ready? I said, no, thank you. We've been married for 56 years. So I walked into the room, and there was Mrs. Albert. She was not ready. And I'm going to use a couple of words that you can Google it later and see that no other comedian ever has used this in his or her act. I'm going to use the words urethra and cystoscopy. I had to have a cystoscopy. They wanted to check my bladder. What they saw was lovely. I mean, pictures of my bladder adorn the walls of my doctor's office now. It's beautiful. But to do that, they take a tube and they put it in your urethra, into the bladder, and at the end of the tube, there's a light and a camera on a little tiny iPhone 14. And I was waiting when the anesthesiologist walked in, along with a very attractive young woman. He said, this is Dr. Richmond. She's a resident, and she'd like to observe the procedure. Well, I thought, great, it's not going to be humiliating enough. But then I thought, I'm going to be asleep, fine. And then I said to her, so what's your specialty? She said, podiatry. And the thing is, when I woke up, all of my toenails had been trimmed. I went for my checkup and I was telling the nurse about this. I started telling her, she said, oh yeah, Dr. Stern told us. And I realized my urologist is doing my act. So we have two children. We have an adorable 53-year-old. Little cutie, 49 years old, both still in the gifted program, both still in my Verizon plan. We follow Jewish tradition. We named our son after my grandfather. We called him Grandpa. And we got some good news about him years ago. We found out we were able to arrange a student loan for him. We loaned him to a family in Iowa. And thinking back over the years, the teenage years were the roughest. I don't need to tell you if you had teenage kids. Actually, the Torah speaks about kids that age. According to one of the commentaries, the reason Abraham was about to sacrifice Isaac at the age of 12 and not 13 is because at 13, it wouldn't have been a sacrifice. I remember when I was that age, I think I was 11 or 12. That's when my father and I had the talk. The talk. What's that? Somebody's phone's ringing. Okay. All right. We get one more shot, and then we go out and we kill you. So turn them off. Turn them off. Turn them off. So I was, as I've been 11 or 12 years old, and we were lying on the beach, and very surprising, my father turned to me and he said, "So Bobby, you know about masturbation, right?" And I said, "Yeah, I do. I'm going to get a Coke." That was the totality of our conversation. It's all these years later, and I still wonder whether he meant not to or how to. We have pets in our family. We have a dog and a couple of cats. The dog is a recent acquisition because our old dog died. And those who have lost pets know it's not easy. In fact, there was a show called Kids Say the Darndest Things with Art Linkletter, remember years ago? Yeah. Little boy had a sad expression. And Linkletter said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Well, my dog died." Linkletter said, "Well, now your dog's in heaven." And the kid says, "What does God want with a dead dog?" I heard about a family where the dog killed the little boy's turtle. So they had a funeral in the backyard. And they're standing around this hole in the ground. Finally, little 5-year-old Michael said, is anyone going to speak? His mother said, "Michael, why don't you? Because after all, you're the one who knew him best." The kid thought for a minute. He said, "Baruch atah Adonai, turtle's gotta die." I told that to a Presbyterian friend of mine. He said when his little girl's goldfish died, same deal, this in the backyard, hole in the ground, and she was officiating, 8-year-old kid. And she finished by saying, "Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and into the Holy Ghost." So I like to talk about our dog. It's kind of therapeutic. You know, we loved him tremendously. He had an interesting history. He was a survivor of one of the hurricanes in South Florida. And whenever those hurricanes hit, the dogs sometimes are blown away and lost, or their homes are destroyed and the people can't keep them. So they put these dogs in pounds for a few months until they organized to the point where they took the purebred dogs and they flew them to kennel societies all around the country for adoption. Our dog was one of them, although he was a mongrel. He came up by bus. Greyhound. I don't like that joke either. But it turns out he was a real southern dog. Dogs in our neighborhood, when they'd bark, you'd hear, "Woof, woof." And when Giddy would bark, you'd hear, "Woof, woof." Yeah. So we waited for a year, and then we decided it was time to adopt another dog. I mean, adopt, like, is there any other way? Now, we had him naturally. No, you didn't. The only way you get a dog is adopt another dog. And we knew a few things about him before he arrived. We knew, first of all, he was born to a single mom. And he came from Puerto Rico. There's a terrible dog problem in Puerto Rico. They're all over the place, and they're nice dogs. They're called satos. Well, they found the litter. The mother had been killed. They took care of them. They weaned them. They raised them, sent them to the United States for fostering, and we got him when he was about 6 months old. The problem is he arrived with the name Jesus. And a Jewish family, dog named Jesus. So we decided to compromise, and we called him Zeus. Zeus. Then if we had to get his attention, we'd say, "Hey, Zeus!" You know, But he really wasn't a Zeus. Dogs grow into their names. He was a Barney. That's his name, Barney. And in fact, the name we registered, his formal name registered with the American Mongrel Association, Dr. Bernard K. Fine Dog. Had kennel cough recently. We took him to the vet. He said, give him these pills and wrap them in cheese so he'll eat them, which he did, and he was fine two days later. But apparently he really liked the taste, because even now, every once in a while, he'll walk over to us and go, And you know how they say dogs and their owners begin to look alike, act alike, a little reciprocity goes on between them? In our house, it's a little bit strange, but my dog gives me kisses, and my wife turns around 3 times before she sits. I was at IKEA one summer day. It was beastly hot, and there's no way I was going to leave the dog in the car, so I took, and other people were taking dogs in, so I took him. The guard stopped me. He said, "Sir, is that a service animal?" I said, "Yes, it is." He said, "Describe his duties." I said, "Brown." We love dogs. We absolutely love dogs. My wife and I have been involved with the Israel Guide Dog Center since before it was founded. I actually officiated the wedding of a couple who founded it, and even before they had their training to become guide dog trainers. And we're very, very positive about it. And it turns out if you contributed a certain amount of money, you can name one of the puppies, which we did. And I was visiting the center, and I saw the litter, and they're just adorable. There was Mikey, Stephen, Patty, Penny, and Rabbi Dr. Robert A. Alper. We have 2 cats. One of the cats sleeps between my head and my wife's head. And I noticed something I pointed out to her with a great deal of pride. I said, "Sherry, do you realize he sleeps with his face towards me and his tuchus towards you?" I said, "He does that because he loves me." She said, "No, he does that because he trusts me." And they're very different cats. One cat, his name is Bob Jr. Sherry named him Bob Jr. When it's time for his snack, we yell, "Treat," and 7 seconds later, he's on the counter. Loretta, she's a little different. When you call her, she'll saunter into the next room, lie on the floor, and wait for us to bring her her treat. So when we call her, we say, "Loretta, room service." And Bob Jr. does a trick. Cats are not known for tricks. But Bob Jr. does, I'm not making this up. And I can hold him in my arms and say, "Bobby, feign indifference." We live in Vermont. Love living there. Lived there for 35, 40 years now. And it's one of the first thing I did when we moved to Vermont was join the AJCO, which is the Association of Jewish Chainsaw Owners. Also became part of our volunteer fire department. I had 6 hours of intense training, which qualified me to do this. Fun fact, if you live in Vermont, they don't let you leave the state unless you look like Bernie Sanders. And Vermont is the whitest state in the Union. You can check that out, the whitest state. In fact, when my friend Kamal came to visit, as he drove across the state line, Vermont's black population doubled. And I talked to him, he taught me something, the difference between blacks and Jews. It's this. When a black person agrees with someone, they'll say, "Amen, sister." And when a Jewish person agrees with someone, they'll say, "You know, I think Bernice is right." So there's a lot of stories that go along with living in Vermont. In our town, they tell of a neighboring town, a small town, that at the end of World War II, a lot of city people began building homes, vacation homes. There was a little church that hadn't been open for years, but the city people reopened it and held summer services. Then they decided they really would like to ring the bell to call people to worship, but they were sensitive to the year-round folks, so they called a town meeting. That's how we make decisions in Vermont. And everyone was fine with the idea until the very end when the oldest woman in town stood up and spoke for the first time. She said the last time that bell tolled was to announce the death of our beloved President Calvin Coolidge. To hear that sound once again would simply be too painful, so I'm against it. And then she sat down. And then she stood up and said, or maybe it was Harding. We're out of our state university. At the University of Vermont, apparently Hebrew, Russian, and German are all located in the same building. It's called the Department of Semitic and Anti-Semitic Languages. And we actually have Jewish farmers in Vermont, Jewish farmers. They're pretty easy to spot. In the summer, they drive tractors with Florida license plates. So my training to become a rabbi took place at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, Cincinnati, Ohio campus. So you can probably understand why we never had any athletic teams. No, because there's no way you could cheer for a team with a name like that. Can you imagine? Let's go! Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, Cincinnati, Ohio campus. Let's go! Not gonna work. We lived upstairs from a pair of newlyweds. He was an ex-Catholic priest. She had been Jewish all of her life until she met and married him, at which point she converted to Catholicism. It was not a marriage made in heaven. They used to fight all night. We could hear every word. And in the morning, she'd come up and cry her eyes out. One day, he's off doing an errand. She came up, gave us her latest series of complaints, ending with words I will never forget. She said, every day, I pray to the Blessed Virgin that he'll just get in his car and drive away forever. Sei gesund. At the seminary, I was able to squeeze a 5-year program into 6. Now, the year in Israel was not part of the curriculum back in the late 60s. So after 3 years of mostly biblical Hebrew, I went to Israel, primarily to learn spoken Hebrew. It was difficult. In fact, I can still see the look on the cab driver's face when we pulled into our neighborhood. And I said to him in my Hebrew, "Behold, here I descend." I was at a hotel, at the pool. I needed to yell over the towel attendant. I wanted to say, "Slicha, yesh lach magevet?" Excuse me, do you have a towel? But unfortunately, instead of saying magevet, I said agevet, which means everyone heard me yelling, "Excuse me, do you have syphilis?" And during one of the first weeks, I had to call our landlord and explain we were receiving bills for the previous tenant. I wanted to say to him, "Anachnu mekablim cheshbonot." We receive bills. He said, "Ma? What?" I said it again. He said, "Maze? What's that?" And I realized instead of saying anachnu mekablim, we receive, I was saying anachnu mechablim, which means we are terrorists. A fantasy I've always had would be to fly El Al Israel Airlines and order non-kosher. Can you imagine? Hakshibo, may I have your attention, please? Would the passenger who ordered treif please identify himself? I did order kosher once. I was flying over to Moscow in the early 80s to visit refuseniks. Kind of cloak and dagger time back then. It was during Passover, and I was on Lufthansa Airlines. The food came in an aluminum dish. On top of the food was wax paper. On top of the wax paper was aluminum foil. Around the aluminum foil was saran wrap. On top of the saran wrap was a little sticker with O's and U's and K's and 3 rabbi signatures. I tore away the stickers with the O's, the U's, the K's, 3 rabbi signatures, lifted up the saran wrap, tore away the aluminum foil, lifted the wax paper, and there was my Passover meal. A bagel. I was walking down Dizengoff Street in Tel Aviv, and there was a homeless woman sitting on a bench surrounded by her possessions. So I took all the change out of my pocket and I offered her, and she went, 5 shekel minimum. And years ago when we lived in Israel, they had payphones, and you had to use little tokens. And I had to call from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, so I dialed the number, and I heard a voice say, please deposit 8 tokens. I said, gee, I only have 7. The voice said, all right, I take 7. And a few years ago, I went to Israel. The Jewish Federation gave me a VIP tour, because I'm very involved in the Federation. We have a lot of shows. We contribute as much as we can. And so they assigned a guide and a driver, and they took me to places where our funds were being used, including Dimona, which is a development town, a very poor town. One of the places I visited was a after-school program for 7 to 10-year-old kids. And they were adorable. There were about 20 kids. They gave them all kinds of snacks and enrichment programs, and just as sweet as they can be. My Hebrew, 50 years since, it was terrible. I couldn't speak to them, so I presented the teacher with some books that I brought, and she translated a little bit. And then I decided, if I can't talk to them, I can still entertain them by doing a magic trick, which requires no speaking. And this is what I did. So you all responded appropriately. The kids, because I found out a few weeks later that in Israel, this is the same as this. I mean, this is fine. This is not fine. This is fine. And remember during the hippie era what this meant? Peace, yeah. And World War II? Victory, of course. And during the Roman Colosseum, remember? 5 hot dogs, please. My first congregation was in Buffalo, New York. I was performing in Bowie, Maryland. Never forget it. I said Buffalo, New York, and a woman in the back of the room screamed. So I stopped the show. I said, Temple Beth Zion? She said, no, Christ the King. But she'd become Jewish. She was representing her conservative synagogue, and a year later I was performing for her congregation there. And which reminded me, I love officiating conversion ceremonies. In Buffalo, I had a lot of opportunity to do that. One man came from a Catholic background. He went on to become a leader of the Synagogue Men's Club, a dedicated member of the Jewish faith. But at the time of the ceremony, he was excited and he was very nervous. As it ended, I took the Torah from his arms, placed it in the ark. I shook his hand. I said, congratulations and welcome. And he replied, thank you, Father. So I was the assistant rabbi in a 1,600 family congregation. During the first week, the senior rabbi took me to show me where the hospitals were, parking spaces, how to make a visit. As we approached the room of one of our congregants, we could see from a distance that apparently he was feeling better, because he was standing by the side of his bed using a portable urinal. We moved out of his line of sight, waiting for him to finish. And as we stood in that hallway, I'll never forget the words of my senior rabbi, my mentor. He put his arm around my shoulders and he said to me, oh God, when we get into this guy's room, he's going to want to shake our hands. Sure enough, Rabbi. Had a very active sisterhood. I was visiting with them. They were in the kitchen preparing meals for a big project they had. and the mixer went on the fritz, and it was really important. So one of the younger women went out of the hallway where the husbands were and brought her husband in. He worked on it for 5 or 10 minutes, got it running. As he was walking out, an older woman grabbed him by the elbow, looked up and said, "You're not Jewish, are you?" He said, yes, I am. She said, "Oh, when did you convert?" And sometimes synagogues can be very political. We had the board of trustees that would meet monthly. I was following 2 men into the meeting when I overheard one say to the other, "I'm not sure which way I'm going to vote on the issue, but I'm prepared to be bitter." My son was little, and he was in kindergarten. The teacher told me that she invited the Jewish father of one of the other kids to come in and talk about holidays. At a certain point, he said, "Now, does anyone here know what Hanukkah is?" And Zach waved his hand. He said, "Of course I know what Hanukkah is. My dad owns a temple." Actually, I didn't. And after 6 years, it was time to move on, time to find what we call a solo pulpit. I announced I was going to be leaving. People were upset. One guy was very sad, and he told me so. I said, I really appreciate what you're feeling, but believe me, the next rabbi will do a better job than I did. He said, "I don't know, Bob. That's what they told us the last time." So I had some interviews. I interviewed a place called Corpus Christi, Texas, which has lovely people, nice congregation, nice resort city. I realized that was not the place for me when I was leaving, and the members of the selection committee stood in the airport yelling, "Baba, Rabbi!" These are not my people. So I submitted my name to what's called the Synagogue Placement Commission. And basically, the way that works, I was sent from Buffalo to Philadelphia in a trade for 2 cantors, one bar mitzvah tutor, and a rookie moil. I was pretty excited about Philadelphia. First interview, didn't want to let on, but I wanted to check out the Jewish neighborhood. So it's easy. All you do is spot the Chinese restaurants, because Jews love Chinese food. In fact, one of the reasons is all of the pork and shellfish is diced up beyond recognition. And by the way, I discovered for the Jews of Maine, but Maine only, lobster is permitted, but no butter. A woman in my congregation told me, she said, "Rabbi, I want you to know we keep strictly kosher at home, but we do eat non-kosher food outside the house." I said, "That's perfectly all right, Mrs. Rosen. Your dishes will go to heaven." And it turns out Jewish tastes have now migrated to Japanese food. I just read there's a chain of Jewish-Japanese themed restaurants opening in South Florida. It's going to be called Remember Pearl Farber. So I was offered the position. First call I made was to my mother-in-law. I said, "We're going to Congregation Beth Or." She said, "Or what?" I said, "Or what?" Beth Or was located in a distant suburb outside of Philadelphia. They had moved there a few years before I arrived and taken over an old manor house. Because of architectural and financial limitations, instead of praying facing the east towards Jerusalem, we were all praying facing the south. I had some theological issues with that until I realized at least we were all praying facing the land of our ancestors, Boca. We bought a house when we moved there. Right down the street, I was at Congregation Beth Or, which is Reform, but right down the street was Temple Sinai, a conservative synagogue. During our first week, a letter arrived addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Robert Alper, asking us if we would like to join Temple Sinai. I replied on plain station, I said, "Thank you for your kind invitation, but we couldn't consider doing that." I said, "Because my wife has informed me that she is passionately in love with the new rabbi at Beth Or." always enjoyed giving sermons, and after I left Beth Or, I spent another 30 years conducting high holiday services. I loved doing that. Most of my sermons last an average of, I'd say, 16 to 18 minutes. If I have something particularly detailed to say, I think I'm right to go on a little bit longer. And I don't mind, looking out in the congregation and seeing someone going like this. What bothers me is if I see someone going like this. Woman came up to me one night, she said, "Rabbi, your sermon was absolutely superfluous." I said, "Thank you. I'm thinking of having a collection of them published posthumously." She said, "Wonderful. I can't wait." And it was one of my first weeks there at the Oneg Shabbat. A man walked over to me, shook my hand. He said, "Shabbat Shalom, your sermon was boring," and he walked away. Came over a second time, "Shabbat Shalom, you didn't prepare very well." Came over a third time, said, "Shabbat Shalom, your sermon was too long." Finally, I went over to the president. I said, "Excuse me, who's that gentleman standing off there by himself?" She said, "Don't pay any attention to him. He has some problems. He likes to walk around repeating everything he hears." And I think it was the teenagers that I walked into the men's room, and on the electric hand dryer that blows hot air, someone had put a little yellow Post-it note reading, "Press here for a message from the rabbi." The thing I really miss about congregation life is the kids. The kids, they're just so adorable. I remember when I was first ordained back in Buffalo, just before Rosh Hashanah, I was in the preschool, and I wanted to talk about the holidays. So I spoke to them about Rosh Hashanah, about the history, the theology, the customs, the practices, the ceremonies. And I felt I'd done a good job. And when I finished, I wanted to see what would be the reaction of these young leaders of our Jewish future. And it came very quickly when a little girl sitting in the front row pointed to me and said, "That man got glasses!" Well, I learned my lesson to abbreviate things. And just before Passover, I was in kindergarten. And I was just trying to explain to the kids the difference between being a slave and being free. And when I finished, I said, "Now, how many of you are free?" And they all raised their hands, except one little boy in the front. I said, "Aren't you free?" He said, "No, I'm 4." I love the assemblies. Kids stood up at the assembly reciting bits and pieces of Jewish wisdom. The reason Moses stayed on the mountain for 40 days was he had extra lift tickets. And King David fought against the Finkelsteins. When I was in seminary, I taught Hebrew in one of the religious schools. It was the late 60s, which was a difficult time to be teaching Hebrew because that was when we made that transition from the Ashkenazic pronunciation to the Sephardic. All the O's became A's, all the S's became T's. I realized I was making some headway, though, when one day one of my 6th graders walked into class and proudly reported that his grandparents had just returned from gambling in Las Vegas. And I think it was the 3rd grade. They were all writing creative prayers. One little kid wrote, "Dear God, please let there be world peace." Another child asked for an end to hunger. A third child wrote, "Dear God, please send clothes for the girls in my daddy's magazines." Told that to a minister friend of mine. He said he was in his Sunday school, 3rd or 4th grade, and he said, "Now, who can tell us about the resurrection?" One kid said, "If it lasts more than 4 hours, call it out." So I did tons and tons of weddings. The worst weddings have to be the outdoor summer events. And I know what happens. People select the location in the winter or spring. They don't realize how absolutely dreadful it can be in the middle of July. I had one wedding in Philadelphia. 99 degrees out. Everyone stayed in the air-conditioned reception room to the very last moment. When it was time to begin, the ushers first escorted all of the elderly people out, which they do as kind of a courtesy so the older folks could spend just a little extra time in the heat and humidity. The couple dragged themselves down the aisle. When they reached me, the bride looked at me imploringly. She said, "Rabbi, it's so hot. Could you please make it a quick ceremony?" I said, "Do you both want to be married?" They said yes. I said, "You are." Autumn wedding's a little bit better because the temperature is much more conducive. I had an autumn wedding. The chuppah was set up in front of a pond on a large estate. Things went very nicely until about halfway through the ceremony, when it seems as if the entire goose population of Ottawa decided to swoop in for a pit stop in the pond behind me. Once they landed, they had to discuss their journey with great enthusiasm. I had to stop everything. I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, try to ignore the commotion behind me. It's just the pâté warming up." Now, a very nervous groom, I said, "Phil, would you please face Nancy and recite the vows?" And he went, A-E-I-O. I was outside a funeral home after the service, and a man came in and said, "Rabbi, I'd like to say Kaddish to my father. Would you please write it out for me phonetically?" Another man said he was a speaker, a lawyer, and I invited him to come up to the bima and speak. And he was apparently really full of himself because he had 7 or 8 pages, handwritten notes on legal paper. But I'll never forget, he began by saying, "We have gathered together to utilize Phil." Another man came up after service. He said, "Rabbi, your eulogy for my aunt was wonderful. She would have loved it. To think what a shame she missed it by just 2 days." And I was in my study one time, the phone rang, and a woman said, "Rabbi, how long after my husband's funeral must I wait before I can start dating?" There was a knock at the door. I said, "Just a minute!" She said, "Thank you," and hung up. Of course, senior citizens date all the time, which is as it should be, and I enjoy reading some of the personals ads online or wherever. One said, "Formerly 5'2", now a petite 4'9". Or, "I'm 83 with a 2-year-old left hip." Still under warranty. And even the younger people, there was one ad that said, "Striking, sophisticated, slender, blonde, former model from the Midwest, looking to meet charming, intelligent, fun-loving, self-sufficient gentleman, 50 to 65, for a mature relationship. Must have positive cash flow, a substantial amount of stocks and bonds, and have a terminal disease with no known heirs." And my all-time favorite, "Single Jewish woman seeks single Jewish man with dead mother." So I travel a lot. Most of the time it's flying, but occasionally I drive. I drove down here, of course. And one time I had to take a road trip around Vermont and New York in the wintertime, and the heater on my car was not working. So I called my mechanic. He said, "Well, it's getting late in the afternoon, but if you could get to me, I think I know what's wrong with it. I could probably put a temporary fix on it." So I was in a hurry. I was wearing my Russian fur hat with the that I picked up in Moscow when I was there, with little strings that hang down. And I wasn't paying attention, and suddenly these blue and red lights come up behind me. Whenever that happens, I do three things automatically. Pull over to the side of the road, find my registration, and of course place my clergy sign on the dashboard. Policeman walked over to the car and looked at the clergy sign, looked at me in my hat, looked back at the clergy sign and said, "What are you, a comedian?" I rent a lot of cars. I drove at Los Angeles Airport, LAX. I rented a car, and as I approached it, I saw on the driver's side window a little sticker that said, "Warning, this car is protected by a passive security system." And I had no idea what that meant until I just touched the door and I heard a voice say, "Hey, come on, get away, go away, please." When I was with my son years ago, he was little, we were driving down the New York Thruway, and I said, "Gee, we're making a really good time, we're almost in Poughkeepsie." He said, "No, Daddy, it's Poughkeepsie." Well, I said, "I know it's spelled, but it's pronounced Poughkeepsie." He said, "No, Daddy, it's Poughkeepsie." I said, "We better resolve this." So we pulled off to the side of off the turnpike, went into a local establishment. I said to the clerk, "Excuse me, could you very clearly and distinctly pronounce the name of this place?" She said, "Of course. Taco Bell." And I fly usually out of the Albany, New York airport. It's an hour and 25 minutes, a medium-sized airport. That's the price you pay for living in rural Vermont. It's well worth it. But occasionally, if I'm lucky, I can fly out of Rutland, Vermont. Rutland is 25 minutes door-to-door, free parking. I'm there often enough so the TSA people, they know me. Last winter, one of the guys was going through my suitcase. He looked up, he said, "You know, Bob, it's pretty chilly out. You should have packed your gray V-neck sweater." And I'm sitting there, and there was an announcement. Flight 63 is ready for departure. We'll now be boarding Bob. And I was the only passenger. I got on, put my seatbelt on. The pilot turned around and he said, "So, where do you want to go?" This happened only time. You know how the flight attendants greet you at the door when you're getting on the plane? First time ever, it was a young man, and he was wearing a yarmulke. So I quickly introduced myself and, took my seat. After the plane was airborne, he started walking around the cabin with a basket of potato chips and pretzels. "Snack? Would you like a snack? How about a snack?" Gets to me, he says, "Nosh." And we're about to take off on a flight, and the captain got on. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have a special announcement. We have some very important people on board. Sally and Harry Baxter are celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. They're sitting in seats 3B and 27D. Well, you are an entirely delicious audience. Just fabulous audience. I love that. So I want to get serious for 24 seconds and then wrap it up by telling you three of my very favorite jokes. But this whole thing about being a rabbi and a stand-up comic, people ask me, "Are you still a rabbi?" It took me a long time to articulate it, but there are all kinds of ways of being a rabbi. There's congregational life, academic life, the chaplaincy, organization life. My rabbinate is making people laugh. And it's because thank you. I think of the words of Maya Angelou. She says, "People will forget what you say and they'll forget what you do, but they never forget how you make them feel." And so to be able to be in a position to make people hopefully feel good is glorious. And the top moment, the most precious, significant moment of my entire career took place after a show when a woman who I knew was dying of cancer came up to me. She said, "For an hour and a half, I forgot I was sick." So that's what it's all about. And doing this And having the opportunity to make people laugh is something that I treasure immensely. So I'm going to wrap it up by telling 3 jokes, because I want to leave you laughing. Okay, 3 of my favorite jokes. A couple was celebrating their 65th birthday together. They were born around the same time, and a genie appeared. The genie said, "You've been lovely people. I'm going to grant each of you 1 wish." The wife said, "I've always dreamed of taking an around-the-world cruise." And poof, she had 2 tickets in her hand. The husband said, "Well, as for me, I've always wanted to have a wife 30 years younger than I am." And poof, he was 95. A young man approached the rabbi before a funeral. He said, "Rabbi, what's the Wi-Fi password for this room?" And the rabbi said, "That's how you honor your dead mother?" He said, "Is that all lowercase?" And finally, a rabbi was visiting a retirement center, and talking to one of the men. She said, "How old are you, sir?" He said, "Rabbi, I'm 87." She said, "Marvelous. May you live ad mea ve'esrim, to 120, like Moses, our teacher." And to a woman, "How old are you?" She said, "Rabbi, I'm 98." "Marvelous. May you live to be 120, like Moses." And to a third man, "And how old are you, sir?" He said, "Rabbi, you may not believe this, but I am actually 120 years old." She said, "Have a nice day." Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me add one more thing, if you don't mind. Self-promotion. I have a website. It's bobalper.com, BOBALPER.com. People think our name was Alpert, but it was Alpert. We dropped the T at a party in Boston. And I love to perform. If you're interested, you can find me. You can go to YouTube. I've got about 90 or so videos on YouTube. If you Google me, you'll find me right away, and contact me. I'd love to perform wherever you are, and that's what I do. I love making people laugh, and thank you for laughing.